because it also kind of sums up a lot of the different parts of my process. The first thing is it's painted on upholstery fabric, which is one of the things I've come to over the years of painting onto these patterns, which in this case is just stretched like a regular canvas. And part of what I'm interested in, besides just the fabric itself and the pattern, is I sewed these two pieces of fabric together and intentionally left this seam showing and pieces of thread hanging off, just as part of the almost to really emphasize the fact that it is on cloth and it's not that I didn't paint all the pattern in there. Although I have had people say, "You're so good at those intricate patterns," and I just say thanks. The painting's called Judgement of Paris, and the inspiration was that I've done a series of paintings before that are about our cultural obsession with beauty and youth, and so I did some paintings of the Hesperides, who are the goddesses that guard the tree of life, and that kind of thing. And I've been reading with my kids this book of Greek mythology, and one of the stories that we read was the story of the Judgement of Paris, where there's a wedding of the gods, and this minor goddess, Eris, doesn't get invited, and she's sort of pissed off about that. So she takes one of the apples of immortality, and she writes on it, "For the fairest one," and she rolls it into the wedding, because she knows that the people fight over it. And so Athena and Aphrodite and Hera all grab the apple, and they're like, "This is obviously for me." And so they take it to Zeus, and they say, "Zeus, who's the apple for?" And Zeus, this is why he's the king, says, "I am not touching that question." And he passes it on to this mortal, Paris, and he makes him figure out who the fairest is. And they all bribe him with different things, and Athena offers him wisdom, and Hera offers him power, and Aphrodite offers him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, which is obviously what he chooses. And which is all great, except for that woman was Helen of Troy, and she was already married, and so it started the Trojan War. So that was a really cool parallel to me with this idea of this obsession with beauty and how it can have such huge influence, those seemingly small decisions, but of course when you're dealing with the gods, I suppose those get big pretty fast. So I was interested in that story, and I thought it would be really, I'm going to add a story to that though, but I was standing in the Utah Museum of Fine Art, and I was looking at a Andy Warhol print, and it was two identical prints of Jackie Kennedy Onassis, and right next to each other, same thing, and I just stood there looking back and forth between the two faces, which I realized after a while, I've been looking at this for a long time, and they're exactly the same, so what, why am I standing here? And it was the comparison. I realized that that's what I was doing, which struck me as a little bit funny, since they're the same picture. But it's such a natural thing, I think, for us to do as people, to start comparing things. So that, in my mind, sort of got connected to this Judgment of Paris. And then it also reminded me of this John Singer Sargent painting, which is one of my favorites of his, which is called Kashmir. And it's a painting of his niece, and she appears 7 times in the painting. And she's wearing the same cashmere shawl. But sometimes she's looking out at the viewer, sometimes she's got her back turned, she's always in a slightly different pose, but you do the same thing. You start comparing all these different figures. So that's what I thought, okay, well what if I did a painting where I put a bunch of figures up there, all wearing the same thing, but different enough that it would put the viewer into that position. So suddenly the viewer is in the position of Paris and is starting to judge back and forth. And everyone that came into my studio was doing exactly that. When I would ask them, like, what's your reaction? Well, they were immediately comparing, which I love. That's exactly what I was hoping, to set up. So these are all people that I know, friends of mine, and I asked them to come into the studio, and I said, just come in and put your weight on one leg and your hand on your hip, and I just start taking pictures. So I had hundreds of photos of these women and other friends also. So, and then I went through and selected pieces that had subtle differences in expression. Some of them a little more confrontational, some a little bit more bemused. This one, tentative, just a little bit unsure of whether this whole idea is good. But I wanted to set up that sort of difference, and yet put them all into that same, the same dress. The background is based on an Associated Press photo of the aftermath of a tornado in the Midwest, and it had it's this, obviously this tree, but it has this mobile home just wrapped around it. And I then added some little elements of some homemaking to sort of, because it's pretty unclear what that is at this point. The sink and the teacup and little elements like that, which also pushes it into, gives it a little feminist twist also of this, kind of questions the role of the women, and here they are in this sort of, maybe glamorous situation, and the home has been destroyed. In the background on this tree, the red tree has roots in a lot of my previous paintings, where trees start to have this sort of divine presence. And it started with a painting where this tree had this sort of burning bush look. It was orange and it stood out from other things. And somebody actually made that observation about it. Like, oh, this looks like a burning bush. And I thought, that is awesome. Because that is this, trees are such a great symbol of the divine that shows up in lots of different traditions. You get these Hindu sacred men in trees, and you get, of course, the tree of life and the Garden of Eden. And so you have, they show up all over. And I love that the tree as this sort of presence of the divine was also the means of the complete destruction of the home here. So, you can go wherever you want with that. I also love the idea, as we're talking about fashion and everything else, that Paris, of course, is a fashion capital. So the Judgement of Paris comes into that as well. So, you guys have any questions about it, or anything that you're?
I'm curious about the smoke.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Because what's burning? Actually, the smoke was I had a very small column of smoke over there. I wanted it to continue with this. I wanted there to be something that added to the sense of destruction. And before I delivered it to the gallery, it just wasn't quite working. And I sat in my studio on the couch across from this for the evening before, and I actually had a friend who's also a past art student of mine sitting in the studio with me, and I was just hanging out talking to him about it, and I was trying to figure out what wasn't quite working to me. And suddenly I had this thought that it needed more smoke. It's like more cowbell. So I brought that smoke in, and it was perfect. It balanced out this. It brought your eye back over here. It was just a much more. It just worked. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes.
But, yeah. Any other questions or observations? What do you think, Fisher? Do you have questions?